Hi guys, I'm Anna.
And I'm Brian.
And we are Those Annoying Vegans! And today we thought we'd do something a little bit different, which is instead of a video response video, we are doing a response video to an article. But before we begin, we wanted to thank all of our Patreon patrons. You guys are amazing. You really help us help the animals who we've rescued, who are under our care, specifically Jackie, Antonio, and Fairu. Now, as many of you know, Antonio's, by the time you watch this video, he will have had his surgery to amputate his foot because he has squamous cell carcinoma. And in order to ensure that he lives a healthy life free of cancer, we must remove his foot. So your donations will help pay for his medical care, and we are so appreciative. On that note, please check out our Etsy store. We have some merch on there. We're almost sold out of some of our shirts, and we won't be making those anymore. We have stickers. We have some new ideas that hopefully we will be able to elaborate on in the near future. And your support on Etsy right now goes directly to Antonio's medical care. So thank you so much, and we hope you like this video. Oh yeah, follow us on Instagram.
If you want. So from the Washington Post, we found this article released not that long ago on the 4th of July, entitled, "Lobsters' Feelings Loom Large as British Parliament Debates Animal Welfare Bill." Basically,
what this article is about is the recent bill introduced by British Parliament called the Animal Welfare Sentience Bill, which essentially enriches current law by adding this additional layer of why animal welfare. And that is, we want to acknowledge in the law that animals are sentient. Novel idea, right?
Since they are.
But
we want to acknowledge reality. Good for us.
Here's the thing. So we're going to go through this article because there are a lot of discussion points in it, and we want to touch on them. Not all of them are bad.
I'm actually going to put this power drill. Get yourself a good power drill, kids. Get yourself a good one. This article is written by William Booth. How does a lobster feel when it's dropped into the boiling pot? The British Parliament wants to know. Is an octopus sad sometimes? Does the squid learn its lessons? The bee feel joy? The earthworm anxiety? The peers in the House of Lords are currently debating the matter. Now, right away, you could notice that they're still using it to describe all these animals, even though we're acknowledging their sentience. How does a lobster feel when it's dropped into a pot? Does the squid learn its lessons? We're still distancing ourselves from the animals a little bit by calling them its.
Yeah, it's one of those things.
That's what people do with pets even.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think is so embedded in our language that most people don't even notice that they're doing it. But we prefer to use the pronoun there.
They, he, she.
Yeah, it's just, and it to us is an object, a chair, a table, a picture frame, you know.
These questions arise because Prime Minister Boris Johnson is trying to make good on his electoral pledge to enshrine into law the idea that animals are sentient beings, meaning the government would be obligated to not only safeguard creatures' physical well-being, but also take into account their feelings of pleasure, pain, and more.
The Animal Welfare Sentience Bill is a potentially sweeping piece of legislation that could require all arms of government, not just the Agriculture Ministry, to consider animal sentience when forming policy and writing regulations. The implications could be moral and profound, supporters hope, or cumbersome and bureaucratic, critics say, with some seeing a power play by vegan activists and animal rights radicals. Because that's what really matters, right? It's the power play, it's the ego, right? That's why we do what we do. The bill does appear to go further than European Union protections, once seen as the most comprehensive on Earth, and far beyond the relatively lax laws in the United States. Someone recently sort of ridiculed something I said on a recent Instagram post we made about Argentina being the first country in the world to ban fish farming. And I made a comment, kind of sarcastic comment, being like, well, you know, since the US is so progressive,
quote unquote,
with environmental law and such, we will probably be one of the last countries to ever consider banning fish farming.
Yeah.
And someone was like, progressive, you should live here. Or
I said, like, you should come here. People's feelings dictate everything.
Yeah. And I was like, first of all, we're here.
We are here.
Because I thought we were in the US with you, unless you're somewhere else. But we are aware that there are other countries who will be way, way later than the US.
But the U.S. will not be the first.
No.
We're never the trendsetter. I heard a caller call into the David Pakman show talking about how, you know, when gay marriage was legalized in the United States, the U.S. celebrated it as like a landmark for the world. And this caller from Denmark was like, we've had that for decades. What are you guys talking about? Like, you guys are the slow ones.
Yeah.
Not the world. It's the U.S.
We are progressive in some ways, but I feel like a lot of the decisions we make are not always for the good of another.
They're rarely for the good of another.
It's because of a convenience, or because it's economically viable, or because, I don't know.
Helps a corporation is
Yeah.
usually the main concern. What is sentience? As Charles Darwin suggested 150 years ago, it may be the ability to feel pleasure and pain, happiness and misery. Now, sentience is actually defined as having a subjective experience. So, experiencing the world from your own subjective point of view. So we know that humans are sentient, we know that other apes are sentient, we know that mammals are sentient, fish are sentient. In the House of Lords, the peers wondered aloud whether they were not touching on questions of the soul. The big picture has changed, said Donald Broom, a Cambridge University authority on animal welfare. I think of the new idea as one biology, that human animals and other animals are extraordinarily similar, he said, and that sentient animals are individuals who feel pain and suffering and all sorts of other things, and that should be taken into account.
Sounds pretty logical. Yeah. Broom said he was, quote, not against eating or exploiting animals, but we should think about them as individuals.
Let's hold the phone. This is what's interesting about this article and why we wanted to talk about it. We want to acknowledge that animals are sentient. They have feelings. They experience pain, they experience joy,
anxiety,
sadness,
misery.
They seek comfort, they avoid pain. Now, I'm not against murdering these animals for taste pleasure, but we should at least consider them as individuals. What kind of sense does this make? Donald Broom? I mean, if we just replace this, he says, he's not against eating or exploiting animals, but we should think about them as individuals. Let's just replace the victim. We're not against enslaving other human beings, but we should at least think of them as individuals.
We're not going to give women the right to vote, but we should at least think of them as individuals. I mean, we're not going to give gay people the right to marry, but we should at least think of them as individuals. See where the logic sort of starts to...
Yeah. Get fucked really quickly.
This is where the idea of animal welfare, this is where it clashes with veganism.
Yeah.
And this is why so many vegans are sort of in this perpetual debate with one another about whether we should support laws that focus on animal welfare rather than abolitionism. You know, we always say we are abolitionists at heart. Mm-hmm. But we acknowledge that society is not often ready for big leaps. Some people think we should close all slaughterhouses. Sure, that's an idea. Is it feasible, though?
Yeah.
Could you ever...
Would enough people vote on it?
Get that law passed?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not that easy. What we tend to do as a society is move in these incremental steps towards a larger goal. So now, you know, this to us as vegans might seem a little ridiculous because here we are literally reading about how British Parliament is acknowledging sentience in animals, yet still disconnected from what that means in the big picture of what is the one way that most of the world, including in the EU, what is the one way that most animals suffer? And that is in food production.
Being confined, tortured, mutilated, exploited, and eventually killed so that people can have burgers and pizza and stuff.
Yeah, and we don't necessarily, because the welfarists will argue, well, we took care to provide them with enough space to roam and cage-free and da-da-da.
Shiatsu massage every day. Doesn't that make it worse, though, when you kill it? Like, you've loved this animal, you've cared for this animal has grown to trust you, depend on you, and then one day you just show up with a knife and slit their throat so you can eat their ass meat?
For animal welfarists, it's like animal suffering ceases to matter the day that
you want to eat a cheeseburger.
Exactly. Exactly. It is based on convenience purely. He said the scientific study of animal cognition, consciousness, and sentience has galloped forward in recent years, and that abilities once thought unique to humans have also been discovered in non-human animals, including tool use, language, sense of time and the future, deception, empathy, and altruism. The bill now being debated is unprecedented in scope because it seeks to protect wildlife as well as domesticated and companion animals, such as cows and chickens, dogs and cats, meaning the government could soon be responsible not only for the welfare of a species at a population level, the threatened puffins say, but also for the possible effects of policy on individual puffins. New questions might arise. Are those popular tour boats filled with bird watchers too close to the breeding cliffs at Skomer Island? Does an especially photogenic puffin seem perturbed by them? Does a rare wild bird have a right to be left alone? It's really granting animals rights based on how they might feel, which is, it's the first, I think, law of this kind in the world. So I get it. I know it sounds a little bit ridiculous that they are just now acknowledging sentience, but has anyone else in their laws acknowledged sentience? So in that sense, it is pretty progressive.
I just imagine like aliens watching this planet from afar going, when they snipped the first tail off of the first pig and he squealed in pain, did they not figure this out? Did they not figure out that pain hurts? And don't do that. A centerpiece of the proposed legislation is the creation of an independent body of experts, the Animal Sentience Committee, who will scrutinize government decisions to ensure that ministers have paid all due regard, quote unquote, to the welfare of animals as sentient beings, or explain why not. Which animals, you ask? Are all animals equal, but some more equal than others, as George Orwell wrote? It appears so. Yes, it definitely does appear so, given the way that people treat cats and dogs versus cows, pigs, and chickens. Perhaps to speed its passage, the bill as introduced applies only to vertebrates, animals with backbones, meaning mammals, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and fish, both wild and domestic. That may well extend animal protections further than we humans have gone before. But activists are pushing for the bill to include some invertebrates, and based on the early debate in the House of Lords, many lawmakers agree. You wonder, is there a lobby for lobsters? Yes, there is. It's called crustacean compassion. Quote, I have been shocked by some of the treatment of animals such as lobsters, crabs, and squid in the way they have been stored and very often killed, said Janet Fuchs, a baroness in the House of Lords from the Conservative Party. Fuchs told the chamber of, quote, one horrible example of a supermarket tightly wrapping a live crab in single-use plastic. A double abomination, so far as I am concerned, and lobsters are still plunged alive into boiling water. I think this is one of the ones that's been debated most heatedly as far as like quote-unquote seafood, which is just sea animals that people choose to exploit and kill.
Yeah, wasn't Switzerland the first country to ban the live boiling of lobsters at restaurants, I think?
It wouldn't surprise me. It certainly wasn't the United States. People have been asking that question ever since I was a kid. Like, oh my gosh, you boil lobster, like, does it hurt the lobster? No, that's just gas escaping their shell. That's not them actually in pain. What an ego on human beings. Yeah. To dip a live animal into a pot of boiling water and proclaim, this animal does not feel pain from this activity.
The ocean has
heat vents.
Yeah, that they avoid. Fuchs said she wanted to see, quote, perfectly good stunning machines, close quote, deployed before the crabs and shrimp go on the boil, quote, which could do this job humanely, close quote.
See, again, I wonder why. Why even bother with the humane stunning machine?
Well, let's define humane. Maybe that's the next step for them. Let's define humane.
I mean, the actual definition of humane is to treat with compassion or benevolence.
Yeah.
So that's...
With stunning machine or boiling, like you're killing an animal
Killing
who
someone.
doesn't want to die for a trivial reason. Like we've said before, you're just going to poop them out a matter of hours later. You're not going to remember them as an individual.
Their entire existence, their entire life, everything they've ever known in their whole existence is just chucked down the toilet for 15 minutes worth of taste pleasure. Think about that. Think about that. Every single animal that any human being eats is being devalued to the point of 15 to 20 minutes of taste pleasure, and then your whole existence is done.
But let's talk about feelings, right? Isn't this what this whole bill is about? Let's talk about sentience. However, stunning machines. Let's stun them before we take their lives.
But why? I mean, I don't understand why.
Oh.
Like, if we don't care about them enough to not kill them for 15 minutes of taste pleasure, why do we care about them enough to make their death process slightly less painful? Like, who cares? If you honestly don't value the animal.
And in a way, isn't stunning in and of itself super inhumane? Because you are literally removing the ability of that animal to feel awareness, to be aware, to experience. You are removing that animal's, you're fooling the animal into not knowing that their life is being taken from them. A colleague, Labour Party member Barbara Young, the Baroness of Old Scone, argued the case for including certain invertebrates. Quote, there is already sufficient evidence of sentience among cephalopods and decapod crustaceans, Young said, urging the Lords to watch, quote, the award-winning documentary, My Octopus Teacher, which explores the rather bizarre and strange, but nevertheless emotional relationship between a man and an octopus. The film won the Best Feature Documentary category at the Academy Awards this year. If you guys haven't watched My Octopus Teacher,
yeah, it's very good. It just goes to show that, like, separating animals based on whether or not they have a spine is just, it's yet another meaningless distinction that we've, like,
arbitrary.
At first we were like, we're human, you're not. There's the line. Well, actually, if you go far enough back, it was, we're white and you're not. We're male and you're not. We're straight and you're not. It's a lot of like, we're this, you're not. Now we're like, we're human, you're not. You're cats and dogs, but you're not. You are cats, dogs, dolphins, whales, bald eagles, but you're not.
Yeah, humans just have this like
we're just moving the line. We're just like, okay.
Why? Why do
so
we always
invertebrate.
Create these distinctions?
Like, octopuses are clearly sentient, clearly intelligent, clearly emotional. It's so obvious.
There is no question. No question.
It's just they have 8 legs and they live in the water. We have 2 legs and 2 arms and we live on land.
Yeah.
Who gives a
When the Conservative Party's Lord Richard Benyon introduced the bill in June, he began by noting Britain's global reputation as a nation of animal lovers. You cannot be an animal lover if you continue to eat and use animals for entertainment or clothing or
furniture,
whatever, exploiting animals. How can you love an animal and cause them suffering? Some people think they can.
Yeah. Can you love a child and exploit a child at the same time? The country's first national animal protection law, the Cruel Treatment of Cattle Act, was enacted in 1822 when Londoners were sickened by the sight of emaciated cows driven to market through the city. That was followed by legislation to improve conditions in slaughterhouses in 1875. First of all, 1822 is when it was enacted. It actually changed 1875, 53 years later. That's how quick human beings are to get done. Then the Protection of Animals Act in 1911 and a world-leading system for regulating scientific experiments on animals in 1986.
I love the vocabulary here. Regulating scientific experiments, improving conditions in slaughterhouses, like oxymorons.
Again, like who cares? You're going to kill this animal for a hamburger and then throw their carcass in the trash. I mean, like, why do you care what they feel, how they live, what conditions they live in?
Yeah.
Like, why is that important to you?
What does it matter all of a sudden? Is it just to clear your own conscience so that you feel better about the cruelty that you're actually contributing to?
It's interesting, if you read this, it says people were sickened by the sight of emaciated cows, which I guess means people want to see non-emaciated cows driven to market. The idea of animal sentience was incorporated into foundational EU law in 2009 in the Treaty of Lisbon. But with the UK's exit from the bloc, Johnson's government came under pressure from voters to establish similar or even greater protections. Mike Radford, an authority on animal welfare law at the University of Aberdeen in Scotland, said that the Sentience Bill may be a bold stroke, but that its vague language, concepts, and definitions are problematic. Quote, politically, it's a hell of a mess, he said, adding that it really doesn't define, quote, animal or, quote, sentience. Radford, though, thought it was, quote, very, very likely the legislation would be amended to include octopus, crabs, and kin, saying that opposition to live boiling has become mainstream.
Quote, chucking live lobsters into pots to turn them red is a major issue, he said. To gauge the power of the animal welfare lobby, note that there are now more than 1.1 million members of the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds, more members than the top 5 political parties in Britain combined. The beloved protector of British pets, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, is now backing crabs and cuttlefish. Quote, it wasn't long ago that there was a widely held view that fish don't feel pain, but groundbreaking research found they can, the Society observed.
Oh my gosh, animals with brains and nervous systems can feel pain. Wow, what an amazing discovery. I feel like this is like 5th grade biology. You have a brain, a central nervous system, neurons. Those neurons detect pressure, pain, other sensations. They report them to the brain. They cause you to get the out of the way, like if you're being attacked or something. Like, it's pretty basic.
If it were biologically beneficial for a fish to be out of water, wouldn't fish just be beaching themselves all the time? If fish wanted to be out of water, fish felt joy being out of water.
It's so strange. Like, did people at any point in history think like, oh no, shoving a hook through this animal's face is fine. It doesn't matter. Jonathan Birch, leader of the Foundations of Animal Sentience project at the London School of Economics, who is studying the issue for Parliament, said a growing body of evidence points to feeling and emotion in all sorts of invertebrates. Though he worries that the new oversight committee might prove toothless and that little might change, he's hopeful. Quote, it's a good starting point, he said, and it's better than nothing. The Sentience Bill has had its 2nd reading in the House of Lords. Next, it goes to committee, where line-by-line discussion of amendments takes place. It may be reprinted and more changes debated, and eventually it may be sent to the House of Commons, where a similar but more detailed examination and debate occur, with more committee work, changes, and votes. It's a long haul, and skeptics line the road.
In the initial House of Lords debate, Daniel Moylan, a baron, voiced his fears. Quote, the logical consequence is that we are driven in the direction of veganism and the consumption solely of non-sentient plants.
Oh, that's something to be afraid of.
Aw, shucks.
Man.
But that's what you're afraid of, because we're acknowledging that we value animal welfare. Which means we value when animals feel joy and not pain, comfort and not discomfort. We value when they are treated well and not treated badly. It's not that big of a leap to be like, oh, then that must mean we should probably avoid eating them, huh? But he's afraid.
But I don't want to do that.
But I don't, exactly. It comes down to not wanting to.
Eating bacon cheeseburgers, and I don't want to stop. But I also don't want to be a hypocrite, but I don't care enough to not be a hypocrite. But I don't want to look bad. So, animal welfare, though.
Not only that, the bill, he said, might give the government, quote, the unfettered power to declare that an earthworm is a sentient being. This is a power greater than that given by God to Adam in the Garden of Eden, which, as I recall, was restricted to the power to naming animals.
How is making a scientific observation a greater power than God? If we discover that earthworms are sentient, if it's scientifically provable, they have a subjective experience of life, that's just an observation of the world. That's not a God power. I don't understand. He's like, this is a power greater than that given by God.
I'm surprised.
Mrs. Hughes, which as I recall was restricted to the power of naming animals. Everyone in Parliament sounds like Carson in my mind. Everyone.
Downton Abbey. We love Downton Abbey. I'm very surprised sometimes when, I used to think, I remember reading about the separation of church and state, and I see that nowhere in our government, or their government apparently, today, because, God is still...
Everyone talks about God and what God says and what Jesus would do and not do, which...
To pretend to know...
Isn't slaughtering pigs by the millions just so you can eat bacon? That's not something God or Jesus would do.
If in fact you believe in a benevolent,
all-loving creator.
Matt Ridley, a Viscount and popular science writer, remarked, quote, the sentient animals that concern me in relation to the bill are the living, sensing, voluntarily moving creatures called bureaucrats. The bill does little or nothing to change the way we treat animals, but it does create a wonderful feeding opportunity for Homo bureaucratius to do what it is best at, to build a nest and raise a lot of workers. The skeptic.
Yeah, I don't...
What are you so afraid of, Matt Ridley?
I don't...
That something will change?
That you might be forced to examine your own hypocrisy when it's placed right here. I think things have to be placed here for people to see them. Between here and here, and here and here. If something's here, then it's like, oh, I'm a hypocrite.
So that is the article.
It's crazy that any government is actually putting into law that animals are sentient. I don't know if that's ever happened. It's interesting to note that one of the main worries that people have is that if we give animals sentience, then we're going to have to treat them with respect, and that probably includes not stabbing them in the throat when they're 2 years old. Yes. Very good.
We're looking at this obviously from the point of view of veganism. They are not there yet, but this is a big step. We have to take steps towards the larger goal, and so I fully support welfare law.
Yeah. As long as it's on the way to veganism.
Yes, on the road to veganism.
And unfortunately, that's how it's going to
that's how it's going to be. Where were we? We went to, I think, a vegan festival, and there were people outside on the street, and they were trying to get people to sign for this law to make it onto the ballot for... Was it
larger cages for chickens or something like that?
It was something. It was a welfare law, and I remember hearing someone refusing.
Yeah.
When you refuse...
Because we don't want larger cages, we want no cages.
Yes, but that is not going to that's not going to happen unless you sign this bill.
Yeah.
This bill.
It's unfortunate.
If you do not support an animal welfare bill, then how can you possibly expect to get there? How does that work in people's minds?
To my knowledge, every other major social justice issue has happened in a progression of steps. This is probably no different, even though it's unfortunate. You would think after okay, well, we learned our lesson with race, but not with gender. We learned our lesson with gender, but not with sexual orientation. Okay, now we learned our lesson with sex. How many times are we going to keep just moving the goalpost further and further until we're all the way there? I think it's evident that we're heading in that direction because, people already socially, like you said, boiling lobsters alive, that's mainstream. That's a no-no, mainstream. Yeah. Wearing fur, no-no. Leather will be next. People are already avoiding red meat. Largely, people are avoiding red meat. People are...
for the wrong reasons.
For the wrong reasons, but red meat's not very popular. Dairy is super unpopular now that there's so many non-dairy alternatives, and people are actually not baby cows, and they don't want to be made sick by drinking breast milk from another animal. So we're just peeling away
at the layers.
These layers of animal exploitation. We're leagues ahead of where we once were. This is probably still going to take several steps.
I don't know, if you guys keep up with like international animal rights news, but people don't realize changes are happening every day, all over the world. As of a few days ago, Turkish parliament approves long-awaited animal rights bill that actually declares that animals are not commodities or products, but are living creatures. Again, one of those things you're like, wait, that's not a huge leap to make because they were always living creatures, but in the law...
It takes an Encyclopedia Brown to figure that one out.
But in the law...
Right.
They will no longer be seen as products, but as living creatures, which increases fines and jail time if a person were to abuse an animal, for example.
Yeah, it's another good thing of these welfare laws is that ethically they're not good. They might be slightly better, but they're not good. But what they do often is they increase the cost of producing that product. Yeah. So even if you have something as simple as we want to guarantee 3 cubic feet for every chicken instead of 1.5 cubic feet or whatever the number is.
Money.
That means, they got to have a bigger warehouse to house just as many chickens as they used to house. Now they have more overhead costs. Now they got to raise the price of the chicken. Or less
chickens, fewer chickens, and bump up the price.
So then the product becomes more expensive. People are less likely to buy the product. Supply and demand, it helps. So that was the article we wanted to share with you guys. Just wanted to give you our thoughts. We want to know, what are your thoughts? Leave them down in the comments below. As always, we want to give a massive thank you to our Patreon patrons.
For helping support Antonio's surgery.
As he just chimed in there. And if you are not yet a Patreon patron, but you like this channel, you like what we have to say, if this channel gives some sort of value to your life, consider becoming a Patreon patron. Yes, Antonio is going to need some help. And so we like to help Antonio, Fireroo, and Jackie. And we can't thank enough our current Patreon patrons who are already helping them. Until the next video, guys.
He said it best.
Also, is it just like the American in me, but I just feel like when dealing with Parliament and they say the House of Lords, and they address each other as your lordship, I'm like, calm down, you're f***ing people. We're all people.
Well, but that's their title. It's like president or vice president. That's their government.
Lord, it's the name you gave yourself is synonymous with God. Really?
You're worth it to